When people think of haunted places in Skyrim, they usually imagine abandoned crypts filled with draga or ancient ruins haunted by restless spirits. But the province's most haunted locations go far beyond that. Some are home to ghosts that refuse to move on. Others are burdened by curses, ancient betrayals, or tragedies so devastating that they continue to echo centuries later. What's fascinating is that many of these places don't rely on jump scares or horror to leave an impression. Instead, they create a lingering feeling that something is wrong, a sense that the past never truly stayed in the past. Whether it's spirits wandering forgotten halls, abandoned settlements frozen in time, or locations forever marked by terrible events, these places feel as though they're still carrying the weight of the people who once lived and died there. Because in Skyrim, death is rarely the end of the story. Sometimes it's only the beginning. And these are the most haunted places in all of Skyrim. There are plenty of places in Skyrim that contain ghosts. Ancient barrows are filled with restless spirits. Forgotten battlefields are haunted by the dead, and countless ruins tell stories of lives cut short centuries ago. But Falkreath feels haunted in a very different way. Its unsettling nature doesn't come from a single ghost or a particular quest. Instead, the entire town carries an atmosphere that makes it feel as though death has settled permanently into the landscape. From the moment you arrive, everything about Falkreath reminds you of mortality. The towering pine forests block out much of the sunlight. The roads are unusually quiet, and dominating the settlement is one of the largest graveyards in the entire province. Unlike other holds that celebrate trade, military strength, or political importance, Falkreath has become almost synonymous with death itself. Even before you discover any of its stories, the town already feels like somewhere caught between the living and the dead. It is this constant presence of loss, rather than any single supernatural event, that makes Falkreath feel like one of the most haunted places in all of Skyrim. The first thing that defines Falkreath is silence. Most settlements in Skyrim have a distinct sound. Whiterun echoes with blacksmiths hammering steel and merchants calling to customers. Solitude is filled with guards, nobles, and musicians. Markarth constantly reminds you of its Dwemer machinery through the sound of rushing water and grinding stone. Falkreath is different. Much of what you hear is natural. The wind through the trees, the distant call of wildlife, footsteps across damp earth, long stretches where almost nothing happens at all. That silence immediately changes how the town feels. It slows your pace, makes conversations seem quieter, makes every sound carry a little further than it otherwise would. The surrounding forests contribute enormously to this atmosphere. The hold is covered by dense pine woodland that stretches for miles in every direction. Unlike the open plains of Whiterun or the snowy tundra around Dawnstar, Falkreath often feels enclosed. The trees limit visibility, roads twist through thick woodland, sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor. Even during the middle of the day, parts of the hold feel strangely dim. There is something inherently unsettling about forests where you cannot easily see what lies ahead. Falkreath uses that feeling remarkably well. The landscape constantly gives the impression that someone or something could be watching from between the trees. Whether anything actually is becomes almost irrelevant. The atmosphere creates the suspicion all on its own. Of course, no discussion of Falkreath would be complete without mentioning its graveyard. This isn't simply another cemetery attached to a town. It defines the settlement. In many ways, Falkreath exists because of it. Its cemetery is among the largest in Skyrim, containing generations upon generations of the dead. Rows of gravestones dominate the landscape. Fresh graves sit beside ancient ones. Visitors inevitably spend more time looking at the dead than the living. Very few settlements place mortality so visibly at their centre. Every resident lives within sight of countless reminders that everyone eventually ends up beneath the earth. That constant presence quietly shapes the identity of the town. The graveyard also changes your perception of time. Unlike bustling cities where attention naturally focuses on present-day activity, Falkreath constantly directs your thoughts backwards. Who were those people? How did they die? How many wars have passed through this place? How many families have buried loved ones here over the centuries? The cemetery encourages questions that never receive complete answers. Its scale implies a history far larger than the handful of NPCs currently living nearby. That unseen history contributes enormously to the town's haunted quality. The dead seem to outnumber the living. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Falkreath is that its residents appear almost comfortable living alongside death. Conversations frequently reference burial, loss, family history. The graveyard is not treated as something unusual. It is simply part of daily life. That normalization feels surprisingly eerie. Visitors react to the cemetery. The locals rarely do. For them, death has become routine, not because they are uncaring, but because they have lived beside it for so long. That quiet acceptance gives Falkreath an emotional tone unlike anywhere else in Skyrim. The architecture subtly reinforces these themes. Buildings are modest, dark timber dominates construction. Many homes appear weathered by years of rain and forest moisture. Nothing feels particularly grand or prosperous. Instead, the settlement almost blends into the surrounding woodland. Nature gradually seems to reclaim everything. Moss spreads across stone, trees crowd the edges of buildings. The boundary between civilization and wilderness feels unusually thin. It's almost as though the forest is slowly swallowing the town. Even Falkreath's position within Skyrim contributes to its haunted identity. The Hold borders Cyrodiil, sitting far from the political centres dominating the Civil War. Travellers often pass through rather than stopping. The settlement feels slightly detached from the wider province, isolated enough that its unique atmosphere remains largely uninterrupted. That geographical separation enhances its sense of melancholy. Life continues here, but at its own pace, far removed from Skyrim's louder conflicts. Death is not merely present in Falkreath's environment. It defines many of the stories connected to the town. The Ill Met by Moonlight quest introduces themes of murder, lycanthropy, and moral ambiguity. The nearby Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary further strengthens the association between Falkreath and death. One of the most infamous organisations in Tamriel deliberately establishes its headquarters beneath the forests surrounding the town. That decision feels almost inevitable. If the Dark Brotherhood were choosing a place where killing already feels woven into the landscape, Falkreath would surely rank near the top. Even though the sanctuary remains hidden, players cannot entirely separate the two locations. The knowledge quietly lingers. There is something fitting about assassins operating beneath a hold already defined by cemeteries. Then there is Helgen. Although technically a separate location, its proximity casts another shadow over the Falkreath hold. The burned ruins of the town remain nearby, a permanent reminder of Alduin's return. Travellers entering Falkreath from the east often pass through the remains of destruction before reaching the quiet forests beyond. It reinforces the sense that this hold continually absorbs tragedy. Death seems drawn here, whether ancient or recent. The weather deserves recognition as well. Falkreath experiences frequent rain and overcast skies. Bright sunshine certainly exists, but many players remember the hold beneath grey clouds. Rain changes everything. Colours become muted. Footsteps soften. Mist settles between the trees. Visibility decreases further. Combined with the forest, the result becomes deeply atmospheric. Even familiar roads begin feeling unfamiliar. Few locations in Skyrim benefit from weather quite as much as Falkreath. Unlike overtly haunted places such as Frostflow, Lighthouse, or Jungvild, Falkreath rarely relies upon supernatural spectacle. Ghosts are not constantly appearing around every corner. Skeletons do not emerge from graves. The town instead achieves something arguably more effective. It creates the feeling that haunting exists even when nothing supernatural is happening. That emotional response is considerably harder to achieve. The landscape itself becomes the ghost. Comparisons with Morthal become particularly interesting. Both settlements possess gloomy atmospheres. Both deal heavily with death. Yet Morthal's horror comes through mystery and fear. Falkreath's comes through acceptance. Morthal feels threatened. Falkreath feels resigned. That distinction makes the latter uniquely melancholic. It has already made peace with mortality, whether it wanted to or not. Even the people buried within Falkreath's cemetery seem to influence the town long after their death. Families continue visiting graves. Names remain remembered. History remains physically present. Unlike many settlements where the dead disappear from everyday thought, Falkreath keeps them close. The past never feels particularly distant. Every gravestone quietly reminds players that previous generations continue shaping the present. Ultimately, Falkreath earns its place among Skyrim's most haunted locations because haunting is woven into every aspect of its identity, not through constant ghost sightings, not through elaborate curses, but through atmosphere, silence, landscape, history, architecture, weather, and memory. Every element quietly reinforces the same central idea. There is a place where death has never truly left. The cemetery dominates the town not only physically but emotionally. The forests hide more than the wildlife. The rain softens more than sound. And the people themselves have learned to live alongside mortality so completely that they barely notice it anymore. That's what makes Falkreath so fascinating. It's haunted because the entire town feels like a monument to everyone who already has. And in doing so, it reminds every traveller who passes through of something few places in Skyrim confront quite so honestly. That no matter how grand your adventure is, every path eventually leads to the same quiet earth beneath Falkreath's towering pines. Long before you reach the summit of Mirak's temple, something already feels wrong. Unlike many of Skyrim's ancient Nordic ruins, this isn't simply a forgotten place reclaimed by time. It is still active, still serving a purpose. As you approach across the ash-covered landscape of Solstheim, you are greeted not by silence, but by the rhythmic sound of hammers striking stone. Dozens of Skarl and Dunmer stand in perfect unison, endlessly constructing the temple without rest, completely unaware of your presence. They don't acknowledge you, they don't speak. They simply work until exhaustion overtakes them, only to return the following day and repeat the cycle. It is one of the most disturbing introductions to any location in Skyrim, because the horror isn't hidden behind locked doors or buried beneath ancient ruins. It's happening openly, in broad daylight. Before you've even stepped inside, the temple already feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by something arguably far worse. A force capable of reaching into the minds of ordinary people and erasing their free will entirely. That psychological corruption defines every part of Mirak's temple, transforming what could have been another Nordic ruin into one of the most deeply unsettling places in the entire Elder Scrolls series. Unlike most haunted locations, the temple doesn't rely upon the past. Its horror is happening in the present. The people outside are alive. They breathe, they eat, they sleep. Yet during every waking moment, not interrupted by exhaustion, they unknowingly devote themselves to Mirak. There is no visible chain forcing them to continue, no guards standing over them, no punishment for stopping. The prison exists entirely inside their minds. That immediately changes how the player experiences the location. Most haunted places tell stories about people who died. Mirak's temple tells the story of people who are still living, and somehow that feels even more disturbing. The mind control itself is remarkably subtle in its presentation. Bethesda never turns the affected villagers into snarling monsters or mindless zombies. Instead, they remain outwardly normal. If you encountered one of them away from the temple, you might never suspect anything was wrong. That normality makes the situation infinitely more uncomfortable. The corruption is invisible, hidden beneath ordinary faces. It suggests that anyone on Solstheim could already belong to Miraak without even realizing it. The temple simply becomes the physical manifestation of that unseen influence. Stepping inside only deepens this atmosphere. Ancient Nordic architecture is already among Skyrim's most oppressive environments. Massive stone corridors, towering carved walls, endless crypts stretching beneath the earth. Players immediately recognize the familiar style. But Miraak's temple quietly twists those expectations. This isn't merely another barrow occupied by Draga. Something else has taken root here. The architecture remains Nordic. Its purpose no longer does, however. That sense of corruption becomes increasingly apparent as you descend. The deeper you travel into the temple, the more the distinction between Tamriel and Oblivion begins to blur. Black books, strange organic growths, tentacle-like formations, unnatural textures spreading across ancient stone. Everything gradually feels less earthly, less familiar, and the temple begins transforming from a Nordic ruin into something entirely alien. Hermaeus Mora's influence spreads silently through the environment, not through dramatic explosions or obvious magical effects, but through gradual contamination. Stone gives way to impossible shapes. Reality itself begins feeling unstable. Few locations in Skyrim communicate Daedric influence quite so effectively. What makes this corruption particularly effective is that it feels invasive rather than destructive. Many Daedric princes conquer through violence. Hermaeus Mora corrupts through knowledge. His presence doesn't simply destroy the temple, it absorbs it. Ancient Nordic history slowly disappears beneath layers of forbidden understanding. The building itself almost appears to be changing allegiance. No longer serving the dragon cult, now serving something infinitely older and stranger. The enemies encountered throughout the temple reinforce this transformation. Cultists remain fiercely loyal despite Miraak's long imprisonment. Draga continue guarding halls, built for entirely different purposes. Seekers and lurkers begin appearing once players cross into Apocrypha itself. Every enemy belongs to a different chapter of the temple's history. The result is a location layered with generations of corruption. Nothing has truly replaced what came before. Everything simply just accumulates. Ancient evil beneath newer evil, each leaving its own scars upon the environment. The cultists deserve particular attention because they represent another form of haunting altogether. Unlike ghosts trapped by unfinished business, these followers willingly surrendered themselves to Miraak centuries after his fall. Some sought knowledge, others sought power, all lost themselves. Individual identity gradually disappeared beneath absolute devotion. Walking through the temple means witnessing the end result of blind worship. People cease becoming people. They become extensions of someone else's will. That loss of self echoes the villagers working outside. The entire location revolves around stolen identity. The black books elevate the horror further. Throughout Skyrim, books generally represent knowledge and discovery. Reading is safe, educational, curiosity is rewarded. The black books completely invert that expectation. Opening one does not merely teach the player, it physically transports them to another realm. Knowledge ultimately becomes dangerous. Information itself becomes predatory. The temple acts as the gateway towards that revelation. Every hallway quietly prepares players for the moment reality itself begins collapsing. Few transitions within Skyrim feel so dramatic. One moment you're exploring ancient stone corridors, The next, you're standing inside an endless library floating beyond mortal understanding. Apocrypha itself retroactively changes how players interpret the temple. Once you've seen Hermaeus Mora's realm, the strange details scattered throughout the ruins suddenly make perfect sense. The corruption was never random, it was spreading. The temple wasn't abandoned, it was evolving. Returning mentally to those earlier corridors becomes impossible without recognizing Mora's fingerprints across every wall. Even the lighting contributes remarkably to the atmosphere. Many Nordic ruins remain dimly lit. Miraak's temple instead frequently relies upon unnatural green illumination. Dark shadows dominate much of the interior. Strange magical effects quietly replace ordinary firelight. Nothing feels entirely comfortable. Even visibility becomes slightly unsettling. Players constantly sense something waiting beyond the next doorway. The environmental storytelling in this way deserves enormous credit as well. Unlike locations that explain their history through lengthy dialogue, Miraak's temple allows players to gradually uncover its story. Broken architecture, corrupted chambers, hidden passages, ancient murals. Every room quietly contributes another piece. The temple rewards observation. Its haunting quality emerges slowly, rather than all at once. Isolation further amplifies everything. Solstheim already feels removed from mainland Skyrim. Miraak's temple isolates itself even within Solstheim. Perched high above the surrounding landscape, it dominates the island both physically and psychologically. The climb alone creates anticipation. By the time players reach its entrance, they already feel separated from ordinary civilization. Descending into the temple only increases that separation. Each level carries players further from the familiar world. Comparisons with Labyrinthian become particularly interesting. Both are ancient Nordic complexes carrying enormous historical significance. Both contain supernatural forces, yet Labyrinthian feels haunted by death. Miraak's temple feels haunted by knowledge. One remembers what happened, the other refuses to let the past remain buried. That distinction fundamentally changes the emotional experience. The temple also stands apart because its haunting never truly ends. Even after Miraak's defeat, the influence of Hermaeus Mora remains. The Black Books continue existing, Apocrypha remains accessible, the corruption has not been removed, only redirected. Victory feels incomplete. The source of power survives, and that lingering presence ensures that the temple never fully escapes its curse. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire location is what it suggests about free will. Every major horror within the temple revolves around control. Villagers lose control, cultists surrender control, even the Dragonborn risks becoming another servant of forbidden knowledge. Hermaeus Mora rarely forces obedience outright. He tempts, offers, whispers. The temple becomes a monument to every person who accepted that offer. Its halls are filled with individuals who believed they were making choices, only to discover these choices had already been anticipated. Ultimately, Miraak's temple earns its place among Skyrim's most haunted locations because it redefines what haunting actually means. Ghosts are almost absent. Traditional horror takes a secondary role. Instead, the temple explores something far more psychological. The haunting of identity, the haunting of memory, and the haunting of knowledge so dangerous that simply encountering it changes who you are. Every corridor reminds players that corruption doesn't always arrive through violence. Sometimes it arrives through curiosity, through whispers, through books, through ideas. By the time you finally leave the temple behind, you've defeated the powerful enemies and uncovered ancient secrets. Yet the uneasy feeling remains, because unlike many haunted places in Skyrim, Miraak's temple never feels empty. It feels occupied, not merely by cultists or Draga, but by a presence quietly watching every step you take. A presence that existed long before you arrived, and one that will continue waiting long after you've gone. That is what makes Miraak's temple so deeply unsettling. It isn't haunted by the dead. It's haunted by something that was never truly alive to begin with. Few quest lines in Skyrim begin as abruptly or as disturbingly as the Dark Brotherhood. Unlike the Companions or the College of Winterhold, there is no formal invitation, no grand recruitment ceremony, and no test of your character. Instead, it begins with a frightened child performing one of Tamriel's darkest rituals in the middle of Windhelm. Aventus Aretino locks himself away inside his family's abandoned home and desperately attempts to summon the Dark Brotherhood through the Black Sacrament. Candles surround a human skeleton, bones are arranged in ritualistic patterns, and the room reeks of death rather than childhood. Before you've even met a member of the Brotherhood, Skyrim has already established one uncomfortable truth. Murder has become so normalized that a young boy genuinely believes hiring an assassin is the only way to solve his problem. From that moment onward, the quest line slowly descends into some of the most haunted and psychologically disturbing locations in the entire game. And at the center of it all sits one small cabin in the forests of Yarmarch, the Abandoned Shack, a place that, despite its unremarkable presence, perfectly captures everything unsettling about the Dark Brotherhood itself. The journey begins in Windhelm, and even that feels strangely appropriate. Windhelm is already one of Skyrim's bleakest cities. Its freezing streets, political tensions, and constant atmosphere of mistrust make it fertile ground for tragedy. Aventus Aretino's house only deepens that feeling. From the outside, it appears abandoned, another forgotten building slowly decaying behind locked doors. But inside, the atmosphere changes immediately. Candles flicker against cracked walls. A child's bedroom has become a ritual chamber. The remains of a human body lie at the center of an elaborate ceremony. Nothing about the room feels natural. It feels frozen in grief. The fact that Aventus himself is only a child makes the entire situation considerably more disturbing. Children in Skyrim usually represent innocence, playfulness, hope for the future. Aventus represents none of these things. Instead, he calmly explains that he is trying to contact a guild of assassins, not because he enjoys violence, but because he genuinely believes no one else will help him. His hatred for Grelod the Kind is understandable. The woman is cruel beyond belief. She abuses the children under her care. She rules the Honor Hall orphanage through fear. Yet the solution Aventus arrives at says something deeply troubling about the world around him. He doesn't seek justice, he seeks murder. And somehow he believes that's normal. That alone makes the beginning of the Dark Brotherhood questline feel so haunted, not by ghosts but by moral decay. After killing Grelod, players might assume the story has ended. Instead, it quietly begins. The infamous message appears, we know. Just 2 words, yet they remain among the most memorable in Skyrim. The note doesn't explain anything, it doesn't threaten you directly, it simply acknowledges what you've done. Somebody was watching, somebody always knew. That realization introduces a different kind of haunting. From this point onward, the player is never entirely certain who may be observing them. The Brotherhood already feels omnipresent long before you've ever met them. Then comes the Abandoned Shack. Mechanically, it is a tiny location. Narratively, it may be one of Skyrim's strongest introductions to any faction. When the Dragonborn awakens inside, they have no idea how they arrived. One moment they are sleeping peacefully. The next, they are imprisoned alongside 3 strangers with sacks covering their heads. Astrid calmly waits above. The contrast between her relaxed demeanour and the horrifying situation immediately establishes her character. She doesn't shout, she doesn't threaten, she simply presents a choice. Someone must die. The brilliance of the shack lies in its simplicity. There are no elaborate torture devices, no grand throne rooms, just weathered wooden walls, a single table, flickering candles, and 3 terrified prisoners. The settlement almost feels ordinary, which somehow makes everything happening inside even worse. Astrid has transformed an insignificant cabin into a courtroom where guilt no longer matters. Only her judgment does. The prisoners themselves deepen the psychological horror. Each claims innocence, each provides just enough information to make players hesitate. Perhaps one deserves death, perhaps none of them do. The game deliberately refuses to reveal the truth. There is no correct answer. Players are instead forced to confront uncertainty. Do you trust Astrid? Do you trust strangers? Or do you reject the entire situation altogether? The shack becomes less about assassination and more about obedience. Astrid isn't merely recruiting a killer. She's testing whether you're willing to surrender your own moral certainty. That test perfectly encapsulates the Brotherhood's philosophy. The abandoned shack also introduces one of the faction's defining themes: control. Everything inside exists according to Astrid's rules. She controls the room, the conversation, the prisoner's fate. Even your apparent freedom. The Dragonborn, arguably the most powerful individual in Skyrim, suddenly becomes another participant to somebody else's game. Power shifts dramatically. The shack itself feels haunted because agency begins disappearing the moment you enter it. As the questline continues, the haunting only grows stronger. Unlike many faction headquarters bustling with activity, the Folkreath Sanctuary feels isolated beneath the forest floor. The darkness becomes constant. Stone corridors echo with whispers. Members quietly discuss contracts with unsettling normality. Death is no longer extraordinary. It becomes routine. Every assassin treats murder as another profession. That casual acceptance slowly reshapes the player's own perspective. Contracts become objectives. Victims become quest markers. The moral weight gradually fades. Few quest lines manipulate player psychology quite so effectively. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Brotherhood is how haunted its members already seem. Nearly everyone carries emotional scars. Nazir masks tragedy with dry humour. Babette remains physically trapped as a child, despite being centuries old. Festus Krex has grown cynical. Vizara belongs to the last remnants of the Shadow Scales. Cicero descends into complete madness. And even Astrid herself constantly struggles to balance leadership with fear of losing control. The Sanctuary feels less like a family and more like a gathering of damaged people clinging to an institution already falling apart. Death surrounds them, but so does inevitability. And that inevitability reaches its peak when the Penitus Oculatus discovers the Sanctuary. The attack fundamentally changes the faction. Many of the characters you've grown familiar with die violently. The Sanctuary burns. The place that once felt secure becomes another ruin. Ironically, the Brotherhood eventually becomes haunted by its own history. Returning later, players walk through corridors filled with memories rather than conversations. The headquarters itself becomes a ghost. The Night Mother's role introduces another layer of supernatural unease. Unlike most corpses encountered throughout Skyrim, she continues speaking. Not through conventional necromancy, not through illusion, but through an ancient connection only the listener can hear. Her coffin becomes one of the strangest locations in the game. Players willingly climb inside the remains of a mummified corpse simply to receive instructions. That action quickly becomes normal, which perhaps is the most disturbing aspect of all. The questline constantly asks players to accept increasingly bizarre situations. And somehow they usually do. Comparisons with other faction storylines reveal just how unusual the Brotherhood truly is. The companions focus upon honour, the college pursues knowledge, the Thieves Guild seeks profit, but the Brotherhood asks players to abandon conventional morality altogether. Not through force, through gradual exposure. Each contract feels slightly easier than the last. The player changes alongside the questline, and the atmosphere does as well. That psychological progression mirrors haunting remarkably well. The past quietly shapes the present. Even the locations themselves evolve. Aventus's house remains a monument to desperation. The abandoned shack becomes remembered as the place morality was tested. The Falkreath Sanctuary transforms from refuge into memorial. Every major setting within the questline accumulates emotional weight. Players revisit them mentally long after completing the storyline. Ultimately, the Dark Brotherhood earns its place among Skyrim's most haunted experiences because every location connected to it is haunted in a different way. Aventus Aretino's house is haunted by a childhood lost to abuse. The abandoned shack is haunted by impossible choices and stolen agency. The Falkreath Sanctuary is haunted by loyalty, betrayal, and inevitable collapse. And through it all runs the constant presence of death, not merely as an ending, but as a mere way of life. Unlike haunted ruins filled with ghosts, the Brotherhood's locations are haunted by decisions. Every contract, every body, every whisper from the Night Mother, every compromise the Dragonborn makes along the way. By the time the questline reaches its conclusion, the physical journey may be over, but its psychological impact lingers. Because the greatest haunting left behind by the Dark Brotherhood isn't a spirit trapped within an old building. It's the quiet realization that somewhere between Aventus's desperate ritual and Astrid's abandoned shack, the Dragonborn stopped asking whether murder was the right answer and simply started asking who needed to die next. There are few places in Skyrim that leave a stronger feeling of unease than Reachcliff Cave. Long before you discover the true purpose of the cave, it already feels wrong. The air is heavy, the silence is oppressive, and the deeper you travel into its tunnels, the more it feels like the cave itself has been abandoned by the living. But unlike many haunted locations throughout the province, Reachcliff Cave isn't simply home to ghosts or restless spirits. It is haunted by something much darker: human choice. By the time players uncover Namira's Coven, the cave transforms from an ordinary Nordic burial site into one of the most morally disturbing places in the entire game. Corpses become meals, death becomes celebration, and the line between humanity and monstrosity quietly disappears. What makes Reachcliff Cave so fascinating is that it feels haunted in two completely different ways. Literally because it is built upon an ancient crypt filled with the dead, psychologically because every chamber seems stained by the horrific acts taking place within it. Even after every enemy has been defeated and every quest is complete, the cave never truly feels clean again. It remains one of those rare locations where the atmosphere itself seems permanently corrupted. The journey begins with Brother Virulus. Unlike many Daedric quests that immediately introduce supernatural horror, this one starts with concern. The priest of Arche speaks about disappearances, about a crypt that has become mysteriously inaccessible, about restless forces disturbing the dead. At first it sounds familiar. Another ancient tomb, another forgotten ruin. Players have explored dozens of them already. But Reachcliff Cave quietly subverts those expectations almost immediately. The crypt doesn't merely contain death. It has become a place where death is consumed. Before reaching Namira's followers, the cave already establishes an oppressive atmosphere. The corridors feel unusually silent. Ancient stone walls disappear into darkness. The architecture is unmistakably Nordic, carrying all the familiar imagery of burial and remembrance. Yet something feels subtly different. Most Nordic crypts preserve the dignity of the dead. Reachcliff Cave feels as though that dignity has already been violated. The dead no longer seem at rest, not because Draga wander the halls, but because something far worse has happened to them. That distinction fundamentally changes how the player experiences the location. The first major revelation comes through Iola. Initially appearing as little more than another mysterious adventurer, she calmly introduces ideas that most Skyrim characters would never even consider speaking aloud. She doesn't scream, she doesn't threaten, she doesn't behave like a traditional villain. Instead, she speaks almost peacefully about Namira, about hunger, about embracing what others reject. That calmness becomes deeply unsettling. There is no madness in her voice, only conviction. She genuinely believes what she is saying. That certainly makes the cave feel psychologically haunted before players even witness the coven itself. Then comes the banquet. It remains one of Skyrim's most disturbing scenes. Deep within the cave, members of Namira's coven gather around a corpse, not to mourn, not to perform a ritual of remembrance, but to eat. The horror doesn't come from the violence. The victim is already dead. Instead, it comes from complete normalization. Everyone behaves as though this is perfectly ordinary. Conversations continue. People kneel together. The feast becomes almost ceremonial. It is not an act of desperation. It is an act of worship. That distinction transforms the entire cave. The location no longer feels like a simple cult hideout. It feels spiritually contaminated. One of the most fascinating aspects of Reachcliff Cave and Namira's Coven is how perfectly Namira's sphere complements the environment. Namira is the Daedric prince of decay, rot, darkness, the things society instinctively rejects. Few locations embody those concepts more completely. Ancient corpses slowly decay beneath the earth. Forgotten crypts crumble into darkness. The cave itself appears abandoned by civilization. Everything about the physical environment reflects Namira's influence. Unlike other Daedric quests that impose corruption upon otherwise ordinary locations, Reachcliff Cave almost feels destined to belong to her. The architecture deserves particular attention. Nordic burial halls traditionally represent respect for ancestors, places where the dead are honoured, protected and remembered. Namira's Coven completely inverts that symbolism. Instead of protecting the dead, they consume them. Instead of respecting burial, they violate it. The same stone walls now witness entirely different rituals. The building itself has not changed. Its meaning has. That inversion creates much of the cave's haunted quality. The past remains visible, but it has been twisted into something grotesque. The priest's fate reinforces this transformation. Throughout the quest, he represents Arkay's teachings: respect for death, proper burial, the sanctity of mortal remains. Leading him into Reachcliff Cave feels deeply uncomfortable even before players understand exactly what will happen. The cave almost seems to know. Every step deeper increases the tension. By the time Virilius reaches the altar, the player has effectively delivered him into the heart of darkness. Whether choosing to sacrifice him or turn against the Coven, the atmosphere remains equally oppressive. The cave itself never becomes less disturbing. It simply changes which tragedy defines it. Even if the Dragonborn refuses Namira's offer, the knowledge remains. Cannibalism occurred here, repeatedly. The stone corridors have witnessed countless feasts. The dead have been desecrated for years. Killing the cultists cannot erase that history. Unlike clearing a bandit camp or defeating vampires, the psychological stain remains embedded within the location itself. That permanence makes Reachcliff Cave feel haunted long after the quest ends. The physical environment quietly supports this feeling through remarkably effective environmental storytelling. Bones, decay, forgotten chambers, everything suggests long-term occupation. This is not a temporary gathering. The Coven has transformed the cave into a permanent place of worship. Players are not witnessing the first feast, only the latest. That implication enormously expands the horror. How many victims came before the priest? How many corpses disappeared into these tunnels? The game never answers. It simply allows the imagination to continue the story. Namira's Coven feels strangely appropriate here, as though it represents another forgotten belief surviving beyond the edges of ordinary society. The Reach has always hidden uncomfortable truths. Reachcliff Cave simply reveals one of its darkest. Ultimately, Reachcliff Cave earns its place among Skyrim's most haunted locations because it demonstrates that haunting is not always created by spirits refusing to leave. Sometimes it is created by people refusing to abandon terrible ideas. The cave is haunted by memory, by ritual, by countless unseen victims. Its corridors no longer belong to the honoured dead. They belong to those who consume them. Even after Namira's followers are gone, the silence feels different, heavier. The walls seem to remember. The darkness feels occupied, not by ghosts wandering endlessly through forgotten crypts, but by the lingering weight of everything that happened there. Because some places in Skyrim are haunted by the dead, Reachcliff Cave is haunted by what the living chose to do with them. And that may be the most disturbing kind of haunting of all. In a world of dragons, Daedra, and divine prophecy, it takes a lot to stand out in Skyrim. Most cities do so through grandeur, Solitude with its political power, Whiterun with its central role in the main quest, Markarth with its crumbling beauty. Others stay small but vital, like Riverwood or Iverstead. And then there's Dawnstar, a snow-blasted port town along the north coast, always howling, always shivering, always half asleep. Even during the day, you might not think much of it when you first arrive. But stay long enough, walk its crooked paths, speak to its people, dig into the lore, and you'll realise something quite unsettling. Dawnstar is haunted, but not in the way that makes ghosts jump from corners, but in a deeper, quieter, more permanent way. This is a town that never rests, never recovers, and never truly heals. It's cursed with memories, plagued by dreams, and surrounded by a history that everyone seems to want to forget. And the more you look, the colder it gets. Dawnstar is isolated, tucked between jagged mountains and a frozen shoreline. It's not a place you stumble into casually. It's windswept, sparse, and grim. The buildings are modest and slumped, like they're tired of standing upright. But the strangeness begins before you even speak to anyone. The people here walk slowly, they speak in low tones, their eyes dart nervously, not because they're plotting anything, but because they're afraid to say too much. Many of them are sleepless, literally. When you ask around, you find that nearly every resident is suffering from terrible nightmares. Some are hallucinating, some are growing violent, some are simply breaking under the weight of the insomnia. This isn't just a flavour of local dialogue, it's the beginning of a major Daedric quest, the Waking Nightmare. And like most Daedric quests, it suggests something chilling. This isn't a recent problem. Dawnstar's been haunted for years. The quest Waking Nightmare reveals the truth. Dawnstar's people are being cursed in their sleep. Every night, the Daedric Prince, goddess of dreams and nightmares, sends visions that grind away at their sanity. You discover that her artifact, the Skull of Corruption, is hidden away in the nearby temple, Nightcaller Temple, looming on the hill above the town like a watching eye. But why is it there? Because long ago the temple was abandoned, and during the Great War the priests of Vermina used forbidden magic to trap an entire band of marauding orcs within a dream. That dream, twisted, violent, and infinite, still lingers in the temple's halls, but it's bleeding out onto Dawnstar, into its people and into its knights. You eventually enter the temple alongside the priest Erendar and banish the skull or choose to keep it. But even after the quest ends, the town doesn't feel any better. Lore books in Skyrim tell us that Dawnstar was once one of the most powerful settlements in the north. It served as the capital of Skyrim during the Second Era, long before Windhelm or Solitude rose to political prominence. Now, it's a mining town, a broken dock, a place that nobody visits unless they're on the way to something else. There's no grandeur left, no stronghold, no monuments to its history. Only a few weary Nords clinging to jobs in the Quicksilver mine, which itself is plagued by tension and unpaid debts. The land feels tired, the sea feels angry, the streets feel like they were made for more people who currently live there. It's a city in decline, but more than that, it feels like a city that remembers what it once was. and hates itself for the comparison. If you side with the Stormcloaks in the Civil War, Dawnstar becomes a military seat, a reward handed to Ulfric's general. If you side with the Imperials, it stays under the control of Jarl Skuld the Elder, an aggressive and prideful man who refuses to accept the end of the Empire's influence. But regardless of who wins, the town doesn't change. No new buildings, no economic revitalization, no safety implements. The mine still functions on the brink of collapse, the guards still shuffle without energy, and the people still whisper in fear and exhaustion. Dawnstar is a political pawn, but one that's been handled so many times no one really wants it anymore. Even its position in the war feels like an afterthought. It's like trying to build a kingdom in a graveyard. As if dreams and politics weren't enough, there's another layer of dread waiting for you in the form of the Mythic Dawn Museum. The same cult that once assassinated the Emperor and opened Oblivion gates across Cyrodiil. In Dawnstar, a man named Silas runs a private museum in his family's house. He proudly showcases relics, including books, weapons, and armor. He's not ashamed, he's obsessed. And eventually he asks you to help him reassemble Maroon's razor, a Daedric artifact capable of killing instantly. You can go through with it, you can even betray him, but the point is, no one in the town stops him. They know he's there, they know what the Mythic Dawn did, but they let him continue, because in Dawnstar, evil isn't defeated, it's just tolerated. It's easy to forget that Dawnstar is a port. The Northern Sea laps at its shores, and several boats bob quietly in the harbour. But there's no trade, no movement, no exports or imports, just silence. There's even a lighthouse, Frostflow Lighthouse, which I've talked about before, located further along the coast. Visit it and you'll uncover one of the saddest and darkest side quests in the game. A family eaten alive by Charus, leaving only blood trails and torn journals behind. That's Dawnstar's coast. Instead of bringing food, travellers, or opportunity, it brings death and boredom. And the people here have adapted. They don't look to the ocean with hope. They look to it with weariness, like they know it might swallow them next. The Wind Peak Inn is the town's social hub, or it should be, but most nights it's almost empty. Innkeeper Thoring has little to say. His daughter Karita occasionally sings, but always sad, slow songs that seem less for the guests and more for the ghosts. When you rent a room, it feels cold. The fire flickers like it's tired. The walls feel thin like they're listening. And even in sleep, you don't feel rested. There are inns in Skyrim that feel alive, like the Bennett Mare in Whiterun or the Winking Skeever in Solitude. But Windpeak? It feels like a place people come to forget. And they never quite succeed. Dawnstar has a few children, notably Aventus Arantino. The boy who starts the Dark Brotherhood questline is originally from Dawnstar before ending up in Windhelm. But there's also another child, Fruki's daughter, who plays with no one, who wanders the streets alone, and who says almost nothing. You can adopt her if Hearthfire is installed, but no one in the town seems to care either way. There's something quietly tragic about the children in Dawnstar. They seem to carry the weight of sleepless parents, fading traditions, and a town that has no room left for joy. They don't dream of becoming adventurers, they don't even play, they simply just endure. There are no easy roads out of Dawnstar. Head west and you find steep mountain trails towards Morthal, which is another eerie town. Head east and you encounter dangerous snowfields and frost trolls. South takes you toward Nightcaller Temple, or worse, Winterhold, itself a ruined shell of a city. Dawnstar isn't just alone culturally, it's geographically isolated as well. No trade routes, no protection, no backup. If something went wrong here, say a blizzard or an invasion or a Daedric catastrophe, it's likely that no one would even hear about it in time to help. Dawnstar is a town on the edge of the world, and it feels like it knows it too. Here's the thing about Dawnstar. You don't spend much time here, but you remember it. You remember the way your breath fogs in the air while talking to a sleep-deprived miner. You remember the sound of the waves against the rocks. You remember the way the townspeople glance nervously at the horizon, like they expect it to crack open. And more than anything, you remember that Dawnstar never felt safe. Not from Daedra, not from history, not from itself. It's not a city that grows on you. It's one that lingers in you. Because true hauntedness isn't about jump scares or undead enemies. It's about quiet places where people suffer slowly and no one comes to help. Some places in Skyrim feel ancient, others feel cursed. Some feel like they were built on stories, tombs with legends etched in the stone, ruins full of screams and history. But then there are other places that feel wrong. Not cursed, not haunted, just off. You walk into them and you feel the air shift, like something is watching, but not from above, not from the sky or some tower, but from the roots, from the soil, from the trees that creak just a little too much. Witchmist Grove is one of those places. It's not marked by grandeur, no NPCs whisper about it in the taverns. You don't go there unless the game really drags you. The trees are still, the shack is open, the stakes were already in the ground, and something about it feels like a scene that's already played out. You weren't meant to interrupt it, just witness it, and try to leave unchanged. Witchmist Grove is a small, unassuming patch of land tucked in Eastmarch, south of Kynes Grove and east of the Sulphur Springs. If you're playing normally, you won't think twice about it, until you stumble upon it during the quest A Night to Remember. A drunken misadventure involving a staff, a hangover, and a woman named Moira. The setup is comedic. You black out, wake up hungover, and begin retracing your steps. And one of those steps leads you here, to a shack hidden in a grove, surrounded by wooden stakes and birdsong. And then you meet her. She's not a woman, she's a hag raven, a twisted, feathered monstrosity, half witch, half bird, clawed and shrieking. And she believes that you're her fiancé. She fights you, you kill her, you take her ring, and that's about it. The game laughs, you laugh maybe, but Witchmist Grove stays with you. For a really weird reason. Before A Night to Remember activates, Witchmist Grove is occupied by a random witch or hag. The area seems like a minor encounter space, one of those locations scattered across Skyrim that gives the world texture. But once the quest begins, the location changes. Moira replaces the generic NPC, the interior becomes specific, and suddenly the tone shifts. The shack has no door, the floor is covered in blood, skeever heads and goat skulls lie broken near barrels. Hag raven feathers are tucked beneath the stairs, a single usable bed sits in the corner, surrounded by bones and flies. It's like a place where no one should live, and yet Moira calls it her home. She calls you her lover, and there's something about that chills more than any drag or crypt. She's not a boss, not a threat, she's someone who thought you'd return, who still wants you to. There's a temptation to write Witchmist Grove off as a punchline. The entire A Night to Remember quest is comedic, inspired by The Hangover. It lets you experience a ridiculous drunken night you don't remember, a goat trade, a temple trashing, a stolen ring. But Moira isn't funny. Her dialogue isn't just mad, it's familiar. She doesn't scream, curses, or summon storms. She pleads. She acts like a jilted lover, a wronged fiancé. Her aggression feels more like heartbreak than villainy. And that makes the joke darker, because Witchmist Grove, her home, isn't staged like a trap. It's staged like someone was waiting. There's no ambush, no minions, just a shack, a ring, and a letter you'll never find. Let's talk about architecture. Witchmist Grove is one of the only player-accessible buildings in the game without a functioning door. You walk through a broken archway and you're immediately in her space. There's no loading screens, no barrier, just entry. It feels like the house is already open, already waiting. You're not intruding, you're expected. It's a small detail, but an important one. Doors in Skyrim are transitions between safety and danger, and between zones. The lack of one here makes the entire area feel exposed, raw, and vulnerable. You're in someone's home and they know it, and they've always known it. Hag-ravens appear throughout Skyrim, usually as monstrous mini-bosses in Forsworn camps or alchemical rituals. But very little is known about how they live or how they became who they are. They're women who sacrifice their humanity for power, often associated with dark ovens and natural rituals. Hag-ravens are deeply tied to primal feminine magic. In many cultures in Tamriel, they're whispered about but not studied. And yet Moira shows something rarely seen in her kind: attachment. She made a home, she made plans, she believed in a future. And even if it's a glitch, a gag, a side quest quirk, Witch Miss Grove becomes something else in that light. A love story. But one where the lover is a hag-raven and the home is a shrine of bones. Skyrim excels at dungeon design. Tombs echo, Falmer caves drip with menace, Dwemer ruins hum with forgotten machinery. But Witch Miss Grove is different. It's not grand, it's not deep, it's not hidden. It's just a house, one you can walk into at level 1. And that might make it even scarier. Witch Miss Grove doesn't operate on combat tension, it operates on emotional dissonance. It feels like someone built it with love, or the Hag-raven equivalent of it. The blood isn't meant to scare you, it's just there, part of the environment. Like this is normal. And maybe to Moira, it was. Let's talk details. There are 7 Hag-raven feathers scattered under the steps. There's a destruction skill book by the bed. There's an unlocked chest, but the loot is minor. There are creep clusters, jazzbay grapes, and dragon's tongue flowers growing around the grove. Ingredients often associated with alchemy and magic. Everything here feels ritualistic, but no ritual is ever shown. That's what's so eerie about it, because usually in Skyrim, when you see a witch's lair, the spell circle is still glowing, the enemies are still chanting, the ritual is in progress. But Witch Miss Grove? It's an afterthought. The fire's gone out, the bones are cold, you're not seeing a ritual, you're seeing the memory of one. One of Skyrim's best tricks is making you feel like the world exists without you. But in this place, it goes further. It makes you feel like you missed something important. Like you arrived just a little too late or a little too early. You can't talk to Moira, you can't ask her why she thought you'd marry her. You can't ask if she made that ring herself. The quest doesn't care. The game moves on, but you don't. You leave the grove. The blood stays. The feathers stay, the air stays thick and silent. You wonder how long she has been waiting, and what she would have done if you had have said yes. There's a tone in Witch Miss Grove that's hard to name. Not horror, not tragedy. It's a kind of off-killer sorrow, like a joke told too late at a funeral. You're supposed to laugh, but the timing was wrong. The entire A Night to Remember quest plays for laughs, and for most of it, it works. The goat trade, the cult, the temple destruction, it's absurdity at its best. But Moira doesn't really feel like the punchline. She feels like someone else's story that bled into yours. And Witch Miss Grove is the proof that she had one. You can visit Witch Miss Grove before the quest. You can visit it after. Moira will be gone, the shack will still stand. The blood doesn't clean itself up, the skulls don't despawn, the house remains open. And empty. Most players never return. And why would they? There's nothing to loot really, no quest to complete after, no dialogue to finish. But for those who do, those who take the long way down the ridge from Kyne's Grove, those who step inside again after the laughter's gone, they'll find something else. Not treasure, not danger, just a space. Quiet, cracked, and waiting. Because sometimes the most chilling places in Skyrim aren't the ones full of death. They're the ones that were waiting for life, but never got it. There are countless caves scattered across Skyrim, each one promising danger, treasure, or at the very least, something worth finding. Most of them feel connected to the world in some way. Bandits passing through, creatures making nests, or quests that pull you in with purpose. Even in the most remote corners of the map, there's usually a sense that someone at some point has been there before you. But every so often, you come across a place that feels different, not just empty, but removed. Jungvild is one of those places. Located far off the northern coast, separated from the mainland and surrounded by cold, unforgiving waters, it already feels distant before you even step inside. There's no natural reason to be there, no obvious path that leads you towards it. You have to choose to go, to deliberately seek it out. And that choice makes what you find feel even more isolating. Because this cave doesn't just feel abandoned, it feels cut off from the world, from the people, from anything that resembles normal life in Skyrim. And as you move deeper into it, that isolation only grows stronger, turning what could have been just another cave into something far more unsettling. Some locations in Skyrim feel remote, others feel empty, but Jungvild manages to feel completely cut off in a way that few places do in the game. And what makes it stand out isn't just where it is, but how it feels to be there. Sitting far off the northern coast, separated from the mainland by a stretch of cold, unwelcoming sea, just reaching this cave already creates a sense of distance. You're not stumbling across it on the way to something else. You're not following a road that naturally leads you there. You have to go out of your way, deliberately pushing yourself towards the edge of the map, until Skyrim itself starts to feel like it's falling behind you. And once you arrive, that feeling doesn't go away. It deepens. The cave's exterior is quiet in a way that feels unnatural. There's no sense of activity around it, no signs of life trying to reclaim the area, no travelers passing through. Even by Skyrim standards, where danger often keeps people away, Jungvild feels like a place that has been completely removed from any kind of regular movement. It's not just avoided, it's forgotten. And that absence sets the tone before you even step inside. Because once you do step inside, the isolation becomes something heavier. Jungvild doesn't feel like a cave that connects to anything else. There's no sense of overlap with the outside world, no reminders of the land you just came from. Instead, it feels sealed off, it basically is, like it's its own self-contained space that exists independently from the rest of Skyrim. The deeper you go, the more that disconnect becomes noticeable. There are no moments where the outside leaks back in, no distant sounds of weather, no glimpses of light that reminds you of the surface. Just enclosed, quiet spaces that feel increasingly detached from anything else. And it's that silence that really defines that experience. Most caves in Skyrim have some kind of background presence. Whether it's the sound of enemies moving, creatures lurking, or even environmental noises that fill the space. There's usually something reminding you that you're not entirely alone. But Jungvild feels stripped back. The silence isn't just the absence of sound. It feels deliberate, like the cave is actively holding onto it. Every step you take feels more noticeable. Every movement feels like it carries further than it should. It creates this constant awareness that there's nothing else around to break that silence. No one coming in after you, no one waiting outside, no connection back to the world you left behind. And because of that, the cave starts to feel less like a location and more like a space you've been placed into. The layout adds to this feeling in a subtle but important way. Jungvild doesn't open up in ways that make you feel free to explore. It guides you, narrows you, keeps you moving forward without offering much sense of escape. You're not wandering through it so much as being led through it. And while that might seem like a small detail, it reinforces the idea that once you're inside, you're committed. There's no easy way to mentally step back and reorientate yourself. You just keep going, further in and further away. And the more distance you create between yourself and the entrance, the more that original sense of isolation starts to settle in. Because at a certain point, turning back doesn't feel like returning to safety. It just feels like retracing steps through the same emptiness. Another thing that makes Jungvild stand out is how little it tries to draw attention to itself. There's no dramatic set piece at the entrance other than a few large boulders and ruins. no immediate threat that defines it. It doesn't demand your focus in the way other caves do. Instead, it quietly lets you walk into it. And only after you've spent time inside does the atmosphere start to take hold. It's a slow realization that you're alone, that nothing is interrupting that, and that nothing is coming to change it. Even the scale of the cave plays into this. It's not overwhelmingly large, but it doesn't feel small either. It sits in the middle ground where it's big enough to lose your sense of immediate surroundings, but contained enough that you're constantly aware of being enclosed. That balance creates a kind of pressure, not intense but persistent. Like the cave is holding you in place rather than letting you move freely through it. And because there's no external reference point, no windows, no openings, no shifts in the environment, you lose track of where you are in relation to everything else. You're not just underground, you're somewhere else. And that's what really defines Jungvild's isolation. It's not just about distance from cities or roads, it's about the complete lack of connection to anything outside of it. Once you're in, Skyrim as a whole starts to feel irrelevant. The wars, the factions, the people, all of it fades into the background, replaced by this quiet, enclosed space that doesn't acknowledge any of it. And when a location in a game makes you forget the world it's a part of, that's when it starts to feel truly isolated. Jungvild doesn't rely on constant danger or overwhelming scale to create that feeling. It does it through absence, through silence, through the steady removal of anything familiar or grounding. It takes the idea of a cave, something already separated from the surface, and pushes it just a bit further until that separation becomes complete. And by the time you leave, stepping back out into the open air, it doesn't just feel like you've exited a cave. It feels like you've returned from somewhere that wasn't fully connected to Skyrim at all. What truly transforms Jungvild from simply isolated into something far more disturbing is the story buried within it. A story that doesn't just explain the cave, but actively reinforces why it feels so separate from the rest of Skyrim. At the center of it all is Arundel, a necromancer whose presence lingers long after you begin to understand what he was doing there. And unlike many figures in Skyrim who pursue power, knowledge, or even survival through dark means, Arundel's motivations feel far more personal and far more unsettling. Because Jungvild wasn't just a place he studied in, it was a place he chose. A remote island cut off from everything where no one would interrupt him. That isolation you feel as a player, that wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Arundel needed distance, not just from the people, but from consequence. And what he used that distance for is what defines the cave's entire identity. Throughout Jungvild, you encounter the ghosts of women, restless, lingering, unable to move on. At first, they seem like any other spectral enemy, another hazard in a ruin filled with the undead. But the more you explore, the more it becomes clear that these aren't just random spirits tied to the location. They are his, victims bound to the cave through his necromantic practices, their existence twisted into something that exists purely because of his obsession. And what makes this even more disturbing is how controlled it all feels. These spirits aren't chaotic or accidental. They are part of something deliberate, maintained, preserved. Arundel didn't just stumble into necromancy, he refined it. Journals scattered throughout the cave gives insight into his thoughts. And this is where things take a darker turn. Because instead of the usual pursuit of power or forbidden knowledge, his writings reveal something far more personal. He speaks about these spirits not as tools, not as experiments, but with a kind of fixation that feels deeply uncomfortable. There's a possessiveness to it, an attachment that goes beyond simple control. He isn't just raising the dead, he's keeping them. And that's where the horror of Jungvild really starts to settle in. Because the isolation of the cave begins to make sense in a new way. It's not just that Arundel wanted privacy, it's that he needed a place where no one would see what he was doing, where no one would question the presence of these spirits, or the way he interacted with them. The cave becomes less of a hideout and more of a sealed environment, a space where his actions could exist without interference, a place where nothing would challenge him. And that turns Jungvild into something much more disturbing than a typical necromancer's lair. It becomes a contained world, One where the normal rules don't apply, where the dead are not allowed to rest, not because of some grand ritual or cosmic force, but because one person decided they shouldn't. And the longer you spend in the cave, the more that idea starts to feel suffocating. These ghosts aren't just enemies, they're remnants of something that was never meant to continue. And yet they do, because Arundel made sure of it. When you finally encounter him, there's no grand reveal, no moment of dramatic realization. He's simply there, another figure in the depths of the cave, continuing his work as if it's completely normal. And that lack of spectacle is what makes it hit harder. There's no attempt to justify what he's done in a way that feels redeemable. No complex ideology or external pressure driving him. Just obsession. Quiet, controlled, and fully realized. And when he's gone, when the immediate threat is removed, the cave doesn't suddenly feel resolved. The ghosts remain until you kill them. The atmosphere doesn't shift. The sense of isolation does not lift. Because what happened in Jungvild isn't something that can be undone by a single action. The damage is already built into the place itself. That's what makes the lore of Jungvild so effective. It doesn't just add context, it amplifies everything you've already felt while exploring it. The silence becomes heavier, the separation from the outside world feels more deliberate. The emptiness starts to feel less like absence, and more like the result of something that pushed everything else away. And at the center of it all is Arundel. Not a conqueror, not a world-ending threat, but someone who took advantage of isolation in the very worst possible way. In a game filled with massive conflicts and powerful figures, Jungvild stands out because of how small its story feels, and how personal that smallness makes it. There's no larger goal here, no impact on Skyrim as a whole, just a single place, a single person, and the lasting presence of something that should have never been allowed to exist, which in a strange way makes Jungvild feel even more isolated than before. What makes Jungvild stand apart from nearly every other cave in Skyrim isn't just its location or its atmosphere, it's how completely it separates itself from the patterns that define almost every other place in the game. Most caves, no matter how remote, still feel like they belong to Skyrim. They're literally within the main map. They connect to something, a nearby road, a passing faction, a quest line, or even just the natural flow of movement across the map. There's usually a sense that if you hadn't gone there, someone else eventually would have. That these places exist within the world, not just outside of it. Jungvild doesn't follow that rule. It feels like a place that exists beyond Skyrim's usual structure. Take something like Embershard Mine or Bleak Falls Barrow. Early locations that are technically isolated, yet constantly feel connected. Embershard sits just off a road, practically inviting discovery. Bleak Falls Barrow looms over Riverwood, visible from a distance, pulling you toward it through both sight and story. Even deeper, more hidden locations like Blackreach or Labyrinthian are tied into major questlines or larger pieces of lore that anchor them firmly within the world. They may feel distant, but they are never disconnected. Jungvild is. There's no natural pull toward it, no quest that organically guides you there in the same way other locations do. You don't pass by it on the way to somewhere else. You don't see it looming in the distance, sparking curiosity. Instead, it sits far off the northern coast, almost deliberately placed where it won't be noticed. You have to choose to go there, and even that choice often feels random, like you've stumbled onto something that was never meant to be found in the first place. And that already puts it in a different category, but it goes further than that. Even when you compare Jungvild to other remote or forgotten locations, places like Frostflow Lighthouse or Kenstag Ruins, it feels more cut off. These locations, while isolated, still tell stories that connect back to the world in clear ways. Frostflow Lighthouse, for example, is tragic, but it's grounded. It's a family, a home, something familiar that was disrupted. You understand how it fits into Skyrim's broader reality. However, Jungvild doesn't offer that same grounding. It feels removed not just physically, but conceptually as well. The moment you step inside, it doesn't feel like you're exploring part of Skyrim anymore. It feels like you've stepped into something self-contained. Other caves often remind you of the outside world in subtle ways. You hear weather faintly through openings. You see light filtering in. You encounter enemies that feel like they came from somewhere else. There's always a thread connecting you back. Jungvild cuts that thread almost immediately. There's no sense of the outside bleeding in, no reminder that there's a world continuing beyond its walls. And compared to other caves, that absence becomes incredibly noticeable. Even the most dangerous or chaotic places in Skyrim, Falmer dens, Dwemer ruins, vampire lairs, still feel like part of a larger system. They exist because of something. Jungvild feels like it exists in isolation for the sake of isolation. And that changes how you experience it. In most caves, and places in Skyrim for that matter, there's a rhythm. You enter, you fight, you explore, you leave. There's a familiarity to that loop, even places that are meant to feel unsettling. But Jungvild, which still has those kind of elements, disrupts that rhythm by stripping away the sense of progression tied to the outside world. You're not there to clear a path, uncover a major piece of history, or push forward a larger narrative. You're just there. And the longer you stay, the more that lack of connection starts to stand out. Because there's no external reason for anything happening inside to matter beyond the cave itself, other than the fact that Arundel was pushed away from Dawnstar. It doesn't ripple outward nonetheless. It doesn't tie back into a faction or a larger conflict. It stays contained. That containment is what really separates it from other locations. Even places designed to feel empty or abandoned, like Clam Digger's Camp or Refugees' Rest, still feel like they were once part of something bigger. There's a before and an after, a sense of time passing through them. But Jungvild feels frozen in a way that ignores that flow entirely. It doesn't feel like it was left behind. It feels like it was set apart, like it was never meant to be part of the world to begin with. And when you compare it to somewhere like Blackreach, the contrast becomes even clearer. Blackreach is hidden, massive, and deeply isolated in its own right. But it feels alive. It's connected to multiple entrances, multiple systems, and multiple stories. It's hidden, but it's integrated. Jungvild is hidden. And completely alone. No overlapping paths, no sense of shared space, no reason for anyone else to ever be there. And that final point might be what makes it feel the most isolated of all. Because Skyrim, even in the most dangerous places, feel like they could be stumbled upon by someone else. Another adventurer, a faction, a traveller who got lost. But Jungvild feels like a place that only exists when you were there. Like it disappears the moment you leave, returning to a kind of silence that no one else ever interrupts. It's not just that it's far away, it's that it feels unreachable in a way nothing else does. And when you start comparing it to everything else Skyrim offers, it becomes clear that Jungvild isn't just another cave. It's the closest the game gets to a place that feels completely and intentionally alone. Jungvild stands apart from every other cave in Skyrim for one simple reason. It doesn't feel like it belongs. From the moment you set foot on that isolated island to the second you step back out, there's this constant sense that you've gone somewhere you weren't really meant to be. Not just far away, but completely cut off. Other caves connect back to the world. They tie into quests, factions, or the land around them. Jungvild doesn't. It exists on its own, separate, self-contained, almost forgotten. And that's what makes it so effective. Because the isolation isn't just about distance. It's about disconnection. From Skyrim, from people, from anything familiar. By the time you leave, it doesn't feel like you've just cleared another cave. It feels like you've returned from somewhere that was never fully a part of the world to begin with. What makes a place truly haunted in Skyrim isn't always the presence of ghosts. More often, it's the feeling that the past has never really left. Ancient betrayals, forgotten rituals, terrible crimes, and lingering curses all leave their mark on the landscape, turning ordinary ruins and settlements into places that feel permanently changed by what happened there. Some locations are haunted literally, with restless spirits refusing to move on. Others are haunted by memory, where every corridor, every ruined wall, and every abandoned room quietly tells the story of people whose suffering still seems to linger. Even after the enemies are defeated and the quests are complete, those places never quite feel empty. That's what makes Skyrim's world so memorable. Its greatest horrors aren't always the monsters you fight. They're the stories left behind, the feeling that history is still echoing through the stone, and that some places carry scars too deep for time to heal. Because in Skyrim, the dead rarely stay silent. And sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones filled with ghosts. They're the ones where the past never stopped whispering.